To be very, very careful because of the danger that existed, and I remember a bucket of water being alongside of the tree just in the event that a fire should start, could be immediately put out. But recollections of that character, I remember, and it seems strange to go back that far. Again, I don't know what I could have been, 6, 7, visiting Santa Claus at R.H. Macy in New York. And I remember the little toy that was given to me, as it was to all the other children. And I remember, too, a practice that the Irish had at that time. On Christmas Eve, there'd be a big candle. The thing must have been about 2 foot tall, which would be lit. The purpose, as my grandmother explained some years, to light the way for the Christ child. But of course, when Mom died at my age 9 and the 3 below me, any such festivities was, of course, abandoned. We never had well, we did have trees in the house. I remember my brother Mickey, he would go down probably Christmas Eve or maybe Christmas morning and scrounge around and pick up some little old tree that might have been thrown away. And I recall we had a wooden box that we put a hole in, put the tree in, and threw cotton on it to give it some resemblance of a Christmas tree. But no, there was, I suppose, a lot of sorrow in the family. My poor grandmother, who of course was Mother's mother, she lost her, she had 2 sons and a daughter. She lost all 3, both her husband and the oldest son and my Uncle John. They passed away before my mother, so Grandma was allowed to remain on Earth for a good many more years, and there was some sorrow in the family, unquestionably. But looking back in retrospect, it was a very enjoyable existence. We didn't have much, but of course nobody had much at that time.
Hey, Dad, tell us about your first job in the theaters, and particularly your further work experiences in the shipping industry.
I could sit here all afternoon and tell you about those experiences, Jimmy. Again, trying to determine the exact time when such things did occur. I graduated from grammar school in 1926, June of that year, and I started the High School of Commerce in the fall of 26. And I recall on the street one evening, a friend of mine, he was somewhat older than me, but he came along and he said, "Hey, Vin, how would you like to go to work as a page boy?" Well, doing what? Well, we could use a young fellow to act as a page boy in the Biltmore Theater. Well, the Biltmore was a fairly new house, and I said, sure, I'd love to. And sure enough, I went over the next evening. I say evening because most of the work was at nighttime, with 2 matinees on a Wednesday and a Saturday. So that really was my first experience in work. I was to be paid $6 a week, and I remember rather vividly my first pay envelope. I couldn't get home fast enough to give it to Grandma. Back at that time, all kids who were able to go out and earn a few dollars, most were devoted to their family, and it wasn't a question of trying to keep the money of the life, but you got a great feeling of satisfaction in thinking that you were making a contribution to the family. I worked in the legitimate theaters, as it was termed, legitimate as opposed to movie houses. And I worked about 3 years. And I saw, I suppose, all of the most prominent people in the industry at some time or other, on the stage or in plays. As a, incidentally, from the Biltmore I went to the Mansfield and then down to the Majestic, to the Royal, to the Mask. There were 5 houses known as the Shannon theater chain. And I was fortunate to have been assigned to every one of them at some time or other. I began to get some longevity on me in the sense that when the theater that I was working at would close down, I was generally privileged. Management would put me to work in another theater. But it was a great, great experience. Not only in being able to witness all of the prominent people that were in show business, but to be able to grasp how plays were written. I recall another incident. I guess I was about 14 at the time. The general manager of the Shannon group of theaters, for some reason or other, he liked me, and he said, "Hey, Vince," he said, "there's a new show opening up in the Mansfield." At that time I was working in the Majestic. He said, "How about going up and taking a look at it? Let me know what you think." Well, I hardly think he could have been serious at my early age, but I went up and sat in attendance there for maybe a half hour or so, and I came back and I met him in the lobby, and he said, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "I think that's very good, Mr. Klein. I think that's going to be a hit." Well, the show lasted 2 weeks, so my idea of ever becoming a critic was abandoned immediately. But they were years of much enjoyment. As these theaters did open, other fellows from the neighborhood came to work. Law McCarthy, for instance, Tootie Buckley, Tommy Hughes, Eddie McKee. We all had jobs, so to speak. And one of the strange things, I suppose it was my first experience with what I ultimately call the inequities of life, or inequities of employment. These fellas that came behind me, they were promoted to ushers at $10 a week. And there I was, senior to them, but management said that I was too small, too short to be an usher. Well, they made me the head page boy of the Shannon Theater chain with an increase of $2, which gave me $8 a week. Well, that was fine. After all, that was about a 33% increase. But it was just to be $2 more that would go into the envelope for submission to Grandma. Oh, I was 15 years of age in 1928 when I never took a real interest in school, much to my regret in later years. And I sought employment. With Law McCarthy, we went over to an employment agency, and there were 2 jobs being offered, one with some health group and another with a steamship line. And I immediately grabbed at that because I always had a love of the waterfront. And I went down and was interviewed by this gentleman, and he said, "Well, can you go to work now?" I said, "Surely, sir, I'm available right now." So this was I remember the date exactly, it was December the 5th, 1928. The gentleman who was the manager at that time, Mr. Miller, he asked me my name, and I said, "Well, Vincent." He said, "Well, gee, what's your middle name?" James. He said, well, I'll have